We have to understand the role of globalization and how social media plays a huge role as far as the proliferation of information. It's very difficult to stop to totally control the message, as we've seen in previous decades when it comes to propaganda, because of the internet and because of the use of social media. So we know that there has been some satellite jamming, meaning that there has been there to stop people from getting information outside of the information sphere that Vladimir Putin has created. There has been some jamming of signals, and there has been some censoring of information through rerouting of IP addresses. But he hasn't been as successful as he might have thought. And that's why Eastern Ukrainians are vehemently fighting back. And he's even having Russians that are closer to Moscow come out against his aggression.
Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.
Greetings wherever you are in the world. My name is Kaya Nyambi Shivers, and I am here with Dr. Sherice Janaye Nelson, who has been giving Ark Republic listeners and followers an update on what is going on in the Ukraine-Russia now full-scale war. This has been something that Dr. Nelson has been informing us about, and the last time we talked, the hope is that it didn't get to this point. Well, it is in this point. On Thursday, Russia began multiple airstrikes and land strikes, correct, on cities and areas across Ukraine. And now Thursday evening, or our Thursday evening, not their Thursday, because it's Friday already over there. There's been a lot of buzz. Can you give us an update on what it is that you know now?
Yeah, so I've been watching some very diverse news outlets. Al Jazeera is reporting at this moment 137 are dead, according to Zelensky, who's the prime minister of the Ukraine. We are also seeing reports that London has frozen all assets all Russian assets inside of England, and has now revoked some of the oligarchs' passports into the country, who are trying to get, in many ways, away from this skirmish in Russia. And then Vladimir Putin has his own people coming out on the streets that are then against the bombing that they're seeing in the Ukraine. The United States, of course, has also ratcheted up their sanctions, and then has gotten levels of support from all of their allies. We believe that France should be coming out talking about their robust sanctions soon.
What do these sanctions look like, and what is the hope that these sanctions will do?
Yeah, so like I told my students today, the first set of sanctions that we had were kind of like slap on the hand sanctions, right? These are pull off your belt sanctions. And what I mean by pull off your belt, it is going to entirely cripple Russia's ability, and I shouldn't say Russia's, it's going to entirely hamper the oligarchs' lifestyle in Russia. So we have to remember that Russia, although they say they're a federal republic, they are actually an oligarchy with a group of leaders that are billionaires that then run and have influence in the country. And they have become accustomed to a more westernized lifestyle and being able to have what we would consider to be luxuries, being able to fly all over the world, being able to access money in different different accounts across the world, Britain being one of those, right? The British pound, having access to the euro in Europe. And all of those things are now cut off to those oligarchs, and then cut off in many ways to the Russian people. And so what these sanctions look like, people are saying that it's going to take 6 to 12 months to feel their effects. I would disagree. I would say that it will take about 3 to 6 months to see their effects. And what I truly believe Putin is doing is he's waging this war in the winter, hoping that he can make enough ground so that when the summer comes, there's some level of normalcy that then, because he'll be able to threaten Europe and their tourist industry.
But also making this or doing this military operation in the winter also is connected to maybe even supplies of gas too, because right.
No, absolutely. We are definitely at the point where we are discussing natural resources and the idea of those natural resources being cut off. That's to break the resolve, right? But we've had this discussion several times before. I don't believe it's going to break their resolve, number one. And number two, we have to remember that these folks in Eastern Europe know what it is. They have long memories. We have to remember that the Soviet Union, as we understood it, has only been gone for about 30 years. So there are enough people with a long enough memory to remember what it was like to be in the Soviet Union. And there is not much sentiment of wanting to go back. And so, yes, the strike in the winter is definitely about the resources, but it's also about trying to amass as much power as possible before Europe opens its tourist season, that he can now directly affect, because it is not going to this level of military exercise is not going to then encourage folks to come and then vacation in the south of Europe.
Now, one of the things leading up to this, these military impositions that are going on in Eastern Europe was President Putin's claim that he was assisting rebels who want to be sovereign in Donbass in the Eastern Ukraine, and that this was actually peacekeeping efforts. Is that something that he is standing by still? And what is going on, or what's the word from Eastern Ukraine?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely still his playbook. His playbook is that the idea of breaking state sovereignty. And for your listeners, let me just break that down very quickly. State sovereignty is the understanding and the idea that borders are drawn, and that inside of those borders, the government in control gets to decide what happens inside of those borders. And his cry, or his claim, is that there have then been unrest in Eastern Ukraine because they are ethnically Russian, right? They're culturally Russian. I should say more cultural than ethnic. They're culturally Russian, and that they're being persecuted in Eastern Ukraine. Now, we all know that that's absolutely ridiculous. And we know that that's absolutely ridiculous because if they were being persecuted or wanted to then be in Russian control, they could just go into Crimea. Right? He's already taken the territory of Crimea, and they could have migrated there if that was the case. The eastern side of Ukraine is a lot weaker. Kiev is almost in the center of the country and closer to the west. And the eastern side of the country is a lot. It's easier for him to show his military might there than other places on the Ukrainian border. So he's attacked the weakest point. And we understand that in military exercises, that's what you do. You take the most vulnerable population. And again, his information war in the area hasn't been as successful as he might have thought.
Break that down. What do you mean? Us old school folk, we call it propaganda. Right. Information war is the newer, sexier term. But one of the things we talked about, if those people who have not seen the previous podcasts, is Vladimir Putin's ability to control the communication channels and narratives in order to direct a message or convey a certain image or narrative or story in order to justify the military movement that is going on. You are saying that he does not have that control. Could you please give us more insight in what is that looking like?
Yeah, so Vladimir Putin had this understanding that, and again, for your listeners who have been watching, he is a former member of the KGB. We have to remember that he arose in the leadership structure as being a leader about 20 years ago. around the late 1990s, early 2000s. Before that time, Vladimir Putin was inside of the KGB, which is a secret police, which would be akin to our CIA. And during that training, he understood how to create stories, as what you said, propaganda, to then support the position that any foreign leader tries. There's propaganda is not exclusive to Russia. Propaganda is used throughout the international space to then convince its people of why they're being aggressive towards another nation. And so that's what Putin has done here. He's done it a little more stealthily than we've previously propaganda stunts, because there has been a lot of quote unquote activists, right? Or independent researchers or independent journalists coming out and saying that. And as we've learned, those have all been financed by the Russian government. And so he's used that in the region to convince folks in Eastern Ukraine and in the Donbass region that they are being persecuted, and that they need to then consider co-optation into Russia. Where that message hasn't been as successful, and one of the reasons it hasn't been as successful is because Zelensky has done a good job exposing Eastern Ukrainians to Westernized news. And then the diversification. We have to understand the role of globalization and how social media plays a huge role as far as the proliferation of information. It's very difficult to stop to totally control the message, as we've seen in previous decades when it comes to propaganda, because of the internet and because of the use of social media. So we know that there has been some satellite jamming, meaning that there has been to stop people from getting information outside of the information sphere that Vladimir Putin has created. There has been some jamming of signals, and there has been some censoring of information through rerouting of IP addresses. But he hasn't been as successful as he might have thought. And that's why Eastern Ukrainians are vehemently fighting back. And he's even having Russians that are closer to Moscow come out against his aggression.
Wow, that is definitely a different Russia, from years ago, that might be credited to what was the name of that group? Pussy Riot, I think the name of the group.
Pussy Riot, yeah.
Who were a collective of women who were talking about or protesting conditions in Russia.
And highlighting and I think giving an organic and grassroots understanding of what's happening, and that telling the rest of the world that the mirage that's often painted is not the reality. And so what we have to understand is that level of stronghold and their boastfulness, or them being so boastful about those conditions, what many in the West may not see them as boastful, but that was extremely risky thing to do. What it also does is that it creates an environment where such behavior is encouraged, if that makes sense. And that is what Putin is most worried about. He is citing this idea of NATO encroachment, or the cultural affinities of Eastern Ukrainians. But in actuality, what Vladimir Putin is seeing is he's seeing more and more states in Eastern Europe self-governing themselves, and the ability not to have this dictatorial or this centralized rule. And so the more people around, the more countries around him become more democratic and have the ability to self-govern, it threatens the idea of keeping the dictatorial leadership that we see inside of Russia.
So I'm going to move to one thing that you said in previous conversations was, if Putin were to move closer to areas that were nearby NATO member nation states, such as Poland, then the United States' hand would be forced to send troops or take a more active role rather than just send military aid or training. But Biden is remaining or maintaining the stance of doing exactly what he was doing, prior to the conflict. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think where I think there is a strategic mistake being made is not going into Kiev. Now I understand why that's being done. He wants to make sure that he has the backing of the United Nations before breaking state sovereignty and going into the Ukraine. Because if he, meaning us, this the United States, comes into Ukraine, in many ways we can be accused of doing the same thing Russia's doing. And so he's trying to steer himself clear of that. I think that there's a mistake, because I think that Zelensky, the prime minister of Ukraine, has been very vocal about wanting our support or wanting our troops, but he's being very careful of that and trying to allow the UN to play a major role. That's why we saw UN forces in the name of Euroto is the acronym, that have gone into Bosnia to get closer then to the action. So I think that not going into Kiev is a mistake. But I understand the reason not to. We want to be in lockstep with the UN and the rest of the international community. However, I do not think that if the border is crossed in Poland, we will not see active troops or an active engagement. I know that White House officials, or that there are some that are murmuring about a potential no-fly zone. The potential no-fly zone would immediately put the United States in the middle of the conflict, because as soon as Russia were to then violate the airspace, then there could be retaliatory actions, which would mean shooting down of planes. So there's been some conversation about a no-fly zone, about establishing a no-fly zone, but there are differing opinions inside of the Biden administration about said no-fly zone.
So in the past, when it comes to conflict, usually congressional officials, even if they disagreed prior to, when war is waged, there usually is, okay, we need to get on board and move forward and act as one and support the decision of the administration. It's not that right now. There is definitely a fracturing, there is division. Can you break that down, and why do you think the Republican Party or members, some Republican Party members, are vocalizing their dissent about the decisions that are made under the Biden-Harris administration?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there is some dissent because they're trying to maneuver for what they want. And we have to remember that in the Build Back Better plan, there were a lot of backroom door deals that were cut. I would advise your listeners to pay attention to those Republican voices. Who are those Republican voices? Where are they coming from? And then what regions of the country are they in? Because what you will not find are Republicans that are in heavy militarized states, meaning that they have lots of bases, or they house bases, or they house a large member of our armed forces speaking out against, right? You see a lot of these Republicans that are either on the fringe or are posturing for what they feel like they lost in the Build Back Better deal. So I think this is a political moment. And I think that we are in asymmetrical warfare when it comes to our political environment. These are not unifying times when it comes to our bicameral process. The two houses are essentially at war with one another, because many Republicans feel that the House has undue power here, and that the split inside of the Senate, and the tiebreaker then belonging to Kamala Harris, being the Democrats, puts them in a vulnerability. I believe that many Democrats, I believe that many Republicans are on this vocal tip, also because we're in a midterm. We're riding ourselves up to midterms, and they are hedging their bets about the perceived slaughter that is going to happen in Congress because of the disjointment inside of the Democratic Party.
Good, very good point.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Arc Republic. If you like what you see and you like what you hear, you can actually keep this mothership going. How? You can make a tax-deductible donation in several ways. One, Cash App us at Arc Republic Media. And you can also go on our website, arcrepublic.com/donate. As well, you can also donate to our fiscal sponsor and our sister organization at Black Farmers Index, that is Cash App, or also go onto their website, blackfarmersindex.com. We are two Black women-owned media organizations who share our profits so folk can thrive.
I'm going to throw in some of maybe the criticisms that are coming out of Europe itself about the U.S. specifically be involved. So over the years, the United States has taken this role or representation of being the defender of democracy. And so one of the criticisms from coming out of Europe is maybe perhaps the U.S. needs to step back. This is the criticism, and allow Ukraine and Russia to sort it out, being that they are cousins or there's some type of relationship, or at the very least, just allow the European region to figure it out instead of going in and having such an influence. What is your response, or what is your take on that?
And I respect people in the European sphere that feel that way. But we also have to remember that the Eastern NATO, that the Eastern European nations have joined NATO. They have asked for said protection. And the United States has been careful not to antagonize Russia by not adding their border states to that alliance. And so I very much hear the even-handedness of the United States is an ocean away, and that they should allow the region to sort it out. However, there are people in the region who have gotten into a military alliance. And we, as the United States, what type of military alliance or what type of promise keepers could we be seen as soon as it's time to make good on said promise, we take our hands back? And I think that's one of the biggest reasons you see the level of caution that the Biden administration is using in this instance, so that they do not get more of that critique and more people on the boat of the United States needs to stay out. Again, I would argue that the voice of the United States needs to stay out of the conflict is coming from folks that will benefit from us not being involved.
So we spoke about this, but now that there are movements in place, and we're understanding how Russia is moving, how Russia is beginning to move and position themselves in this conflict. Information that came up is that they took over Chernobyl, yes. Which has a sordid history in terms of the nuclear site, which had an accident, which then released a lot of radiation and became one of the most toxic sites in the world, which then
Correct.
led to a plethora of environmental issues, people dying. And to date, there still is issues with environment and in the soil and in the area.
But let's remember that's because Russia was not following the de-escalation plan that they had agreed to, and then tried to store weapons there in not the greatest of conditions. And because those weapons were stored there not in the greatest of conditions and not disposed of properly, we get this accident that then it damages the soil and damages the environment. Let's be very clear that in this arms race during the Cold War to nuclear warfare and the creation of stockpiles, there has been since such time there has been an agreement to then de-escalate and then absolve of those weapons. But there is a protocol in which you go about in doing so, and Russia has not always been an honest broker in how they go about doing that. So when we have these conversations about the environmental waste or the environmental damage that has been done there and the nuclear waste that has happened in the area, we have to then understand the role Russia has played in such a catastrophe.
No, that's a very good point. I also, the larger question is the ramifications of the environment, because what we do know as well is that there are still ramifications in Vietnam, of the United States when it's dumping Agent Orange, the ramifications of, even, we're talking about World War II, and the bombs. I mean, people's DNA has been restructured and altered as a result of these, cataclysmic events that happen. So one of the worries is that if Russia now is over Chernobyl and there might be some action that happens in there, what is going to happen to the environment again? What are some of the, what is your, I don't know if there's necessarily a question or a comment, but it just causes a lot of issues, especially in this time where we're talking about climate issues and climate change.
So when we speak of this, there's a theoretical framework in international relations called environmentalism, and environmentalism is chiefly around the idea that when we're thinking about war and we're thinking about conflicts, or we're thinking about regional skirmishes, we have to consistently and continuously think about the environment, because everyone is responsible for the environment. And this was just recently discussed with greenhouse gas emissions with the Paris Peace Accord, right? So this idea of us collectively sharing the environment and then what happens to it is definitely on the forefront, I think, of certain folks' minds. But what I want to remind people is that the hegemonic nations are not always concerned about the environment. The environment often takes a back seat then to the interest of the nation and the country. And at this moment, Russia's interest as far as regaining power on the international world stage by being able to cripple in many ways the Western economic system, the ability then to halt the succession or the success of democracy in Eastern Europe, are the interest, and the environment is definitely the backseat. And so I think this will play out like it normally plays out. The hegemonic powers do as they will. The environment suffers, and then there is a afterthought conversation that happens about then what damage has been done and how do we put a genie that can't go back into the bottle back in there.
A couple of more questions, because I know you have a lot. You have a lot on your plate right now because you are the flavor of the month, right? Everybody wants to know what's going on. You're one of the few sisters who has a concentration in international relations, and specifically in the region in which we're speaking about. One of I've been in the channels. I've been in the channels, and people are saying there's been conflicts that have been going on in Africa, South America, South Asia, and nobody takes really notice of them. And some of these people that are involved in the skirmish or the conflict right now have baby toes and fingers in these conflicts. Why should, the global South, as some people say, or these regions of the world that may not get as much attention, why should they care?
Well, because it's going to drastically change the international relationships as we know them. And as I talked to my class just today, right, we zoomed out on the map, and we had a conversation as to why would we be talking to Saudi Arabia right now about stopping their proxy war in Yemen with Iran? Why would we be talking to the United Emirates? Why would we be talking to Oman? Why would we be talking to Qatar? Because they're having conversations with Egypt, right? Because that Suez Canal plays a huge then role. So when the global South is saying, why should I care? Because most of your trade in your markets are either to the West, meaning the United States, or then to Europe. And so your raw materials, or your ability for your raw materials may not then get to production phase, or even if they can get to production phase, they may not then be able to be traded throughout the world due to this skirmish. And let's just be very clear. We know that here on the international stage that whiteness is always centered. And although Eastern Europeans are not considered white, they're not Anglo-Saxons, right? They, in the pigmentocracal scale, they are far closer to white than other folks in the global South. And so we are fooling ourselves to think that whiteness doesn't play a role on the international stage. It always does. But why should global South countries care? Because it can literally cripple your economy. And many of the global South countries are talking a big game, but none of them want to be Cuba.
Oh, or Haiti.
Or Haiti.
Right. So I want to ask you so many more questions, but this is going to be an ongoing conversation as things unfold. What are some suggestions that you have for those who are just coming into this understanding of Eastern Europe, after the Cold War, never really studied it? Now that we know that war has ripple effects, as you stated, war even on, the person that's, somewhere in Baton Rouge, where, you know what I mean, or Philly, right, or Newark or LA or Oakland. What should we be looking at and studying or talking about, and how should we prepare?
I think that we should be looking at and understanding their culture, understanding Eastern Europeans' culture and the things that they find to be valuable. And I think what you will find very quickly is that there are some things that they, as a minority group or a minority region or a set of ethnic minorities on the continent of Europe, you, especially Black folks, will find some similarities in how they've been treated and what they have to then go through. There's a report that came out from Al Jazeera about Syria and how Syria is already feeling a level of empathy towards the Ukraine for the level of the death toll and the disruption of life that they're going to see. And so what we should also be preparing for is the idea of refugees, because we are going to start to see these areas get destabilized quickly. And then there's going to be a call for the United States to take on a set of refugees as people flee Eastern Europe and go into Western Europe.
Thank you so much. We have so much to talk about in this, but like I said, we have days ahead of us. We don't know how long, and we don't know how intense it is going to be. But for right now, I want to thank you for your insight. I wish you a great weekend, and just being a dope sister.
Thank you so much.
This is Dr. Sherice Nelson, speaking with Ark Republic. I am Dr. Kaya Nyambi Shivers, and we are out.
Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.